So tonight we've got two presentations, and in these presentations we're going to be looking at a very important topic, and many of you will be challenged. On the very first night I started by sharing that it's not a good idea to follow a religion because you were born into it. It's not a good idea just to accept it because that's what your parents were involved with. And it's the same, that we should not just accept a teaching because that's what we've been taught. We need to check it out. So I just want to warn you that tonight some people are going to be challenged as we look at what the Bible has to say, not what men have to say. Okay, so we'll launch straight into part 7, and as said, it's called Blessings and Choices. I want to take us back 2,355 years. And you may remember last night, I said to lock in your memory this slide that I had on the screen, in which juncture Sanballat the Samaritan sent Alexander 8,000 auxiliaries. You remember that? That was the time when he was just about to attack the city of Jerusalem. And Sanballat, he built a temple, he obtained leave to build a temple on Mount Gerizim. This is a picture of Mount Gerizim. Today, you see in the left of the screen, there's what they call a mountain in Israel, hardly what we call a mountain in New Zealand. It's a bit like an Australian mountain, it's more just a hill. But that's Mount Gerizim on your left, and the ruins of the Samaritan temple. Shechem is in the middle of the valley, Mount Ebal is on the left, Sychar is on the side of the hill on the right, and you'll also notice down the bottom there's Jacob's well. We want to go there 3,950 years ago, and the book of Genesis tells us that when Abraham went into the promised land, the land that he was to inherit, we read this, and into the land of Canaan they came, and Abram passed through the land under the place of Shechem, under the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abraham and said, unto your seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. So in this place, Abram at the time built the very first altar that he built in the promised land. Let's go there today. This is what it looks like today. It's the modern city of Nablus. And this city is a modern city, but it's got, like many places in the Middle East, some ancient ruins. Some Germans were digging there back in 1903 under the watchful eye and the leadership of Hermann Tiersch, and they discovered the ruins which have now been identified as the ancient city of Shechem. That's what they look like. They are the ruins. This was an area that wasn't well known outside of biblical narrative, if you like. But in Egypt, there's this stone from the 14th century before Christ. So this is 3,400 years ago. From the Tel Amarna in Egypt, we find this inscription. It's called the Amarna letter. It's from Labu, the head of the Haparu, who lived in Shechem. And this letter was written to the Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep III or his son Akhenaten. And the letter is a response to the threat from the Egyptian pharaoh that these guys were being treacherous because they attacked the city. The Labu sent in this letter, he wrote a little proverb. When an ant is struck, does it not fight back and bite the hand of the man that struck it? Justifying his overthrowing of another village to appease the wrath of the Pharaoh, as it were. 1901, in Abydos in Egypt, John Garstang, he discovered a thing called the Sebek Ku Stele, or the Ko Sebek. He goes by two names. It's largely about this man's life. And it records the earliest known military campaign into what we would call Canaan. This is the first military campaign. And the text reads, His Majesty proceeded northward to overthrow the Asiatics. His Majesty reached a foreign country of which the name was Shechem. Then Shechem fell together with the wretched retinue. They identify this place that he's talking about as being Shechem. It's the capital of the Haparu. These were a group of warlike people that lived in Canaan at the time of the Pharaonic rule. Let's go to that place. Let's go back to that same little valley 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, 1,400 years after the attack of Kusobek and his soldiers from Egypt, there's a lady walking down that very valley. And as she's walking down that valley in the heat of the day, she comes to a well and finds a man sitting on the well. We find the story recorded for us in the Bible in the book of John, John chapter 4. And in verses 5 and 6, it says, "Then comes he," this is Messiah, "to a city of Samaria which is called Sychar, near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. He sits down on the well that Jacob built near the parcel of land that he gave to Joseph centuries and centuries before." Verses 19 and 20, after some discussion, and Jesus makes the woman feel uncomfortable, she says to him, "Sir, I perceive you are a prophet." And she says, "Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship." She talks about this mountain. What mountain is she talking about when she says this mountain? I showed you the image. There's two mountains. It's one of the two, isn't it? It's either Gerizim or Ebal. What mountain do you think she's talking about? It's Mount Gerizim, where this temple was built. This was the temple that was built by Sanballat to imitate the temple in Jerusalem. And this temple was destroyed in 129 BC by John Hyrcanus as they came through, and there was a rebellion from the Samaritans, and that temple was destroyed. So when Jesus was talking to the woman at the well, there hadn't been a temple on Mount Gerizim for some 200 years. Let's go 3,500 years ago. Deuteronomy 11:29. And as we do this, I want to ask the question, when that lady sitting at the well, talking to Jesus, says, "Well, you Jews say you should worship in Jerusalem. We've been taught we should worship in Mount Gerizim. Has Mount Gerizim got any credibility? Has it got any pedigree, any justification that they should be worshipping there?" Well, let's have a look. Deuteronomy 11:29, Moses is saying, just before his death, "It shall come to pass, when the Lord your God has brought you into the land whither you go to possess it, that you shall put the blessing upon" which mount? Mount Gerizim, out of all the mountains in Canaan, "and the curse upon Mount Ebal." That's the two mountains there. That's the two mountains as they stand today above the modern city of Nablus. Genesis 12:6 and 7, it says, unto your seed will I give this land, and there build he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him." God has made a promise. God made a promise. I'm going to give your seed this land. Are God's promises sure? We need to ask the question though, are God's promises, and sometimes even his prophecies, are they conditional or unconditional? If God says that, is it just going to happen? We want to evaluate the reality of that. Are God's promises conditional or unconditional? And the book of Deuteronomy gives us some clear evidence for that. "Behold, I set before you this day blessing and cursing. A blessing, what does it say? If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day. And a curse, if you will not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside out of the way which I command you this day to go after other gods which you have not known. There's a very big word in there, isn't there? What's that very big word? It's the if word again. If. So when God says two things, you're going to be blessed, you're going to be cursed. They both can't be right, can they? One, you cannot have two diametric things both being correct. So he's either blessing them or he's cursing them. But it's contingent upon their choice. You tracking with me here? The blessing is dependent upon their choice. And in Deuteronomy verses 1, 8, 13, 18 to 20, 22, 27 and 32, the same phrase is given, that these things will happen if you keep my commandments. If you keep my commandments. The next year, we have Joshua coming into the promised land. And in Joshua 8, 32 and 35, following the instruction of Moses, he wrote upon the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel. And all Israel, and their elders, and officers, and their judges stood on this side, the ark, and on that side before the priests, the Levites, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, as well as the stranger. Everybody was just divided up and all standing there waiting for an announcement from Joshua. As he that was born among them, half of them over against Mount which? Well, this side for Gerizim, and the other half over against Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded before, that he should bless the people of Israel. Are you tracking with me here? Moses said, when you go into the promised land, some of you are going to stand on the Mount of Blessing, which is Mount Gerizim. Some of you are going to stand on the Mount of Cursing, which is Mount Ebal. After they go into the promised land, Joshua immediately obeys that commandment and sets the people up, some on Gerizim, some on Mount Ebal, that they should bless the people of Israel. And afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessings and the cursings, according to all that is written in the book of the law. So I want to ask the question, does Mount Gerizim have some pedigree? Absolutely. So when this woman said, our fathers say we should worship in this mountain, there's a lot that's gone on there. Jacob's built a well. He's given it to Joseph, his son. We've got Abraham building the first altar in Canaan there. Moses calling it the Mount of Blessing. When they go in there, the people stand on Mount Gerizim to offer a blessing. But it says, if you will obey. The question begs to be asked, how did they do at obeying? How well did they obey? Because we've ascertained that the blessings are contingent upon their obedience. It's not just a blanket statement that, oh, you're going to be blessed, do what you like. It's if. Let's just jump forward 600 years now to Samaria. What was happening in Samaria? And we've looked at in a previous program that Israel was split in two. The 10 northern tribes became Israel with the capital in Samaria. The 2 southern tribes, we've got Judah and Benjamin. That's what we would call Judah, the southern tribe. The top was known as Israel or Samaria. How did Samaria do? Not so good. They fell into blatant idolatry. They got involved in everything that God said not to. They were like a naughty child. Mummy says, don't do this. That's the first thing they go and do. There was not one thing that God had told them not to do that they didn't do, and there was hardly anything He told them to do that they did do. In fact, their king, the last of the Amorite kings, a man by the name of Ahab, he went and married, and that was one of their commandments, not to marry the people from Canaan. He married Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, the king of the Zidonians. Completely disregarding all of God's commandments, but still wanting to claim the blessings. Still wanting the blessings, but wanting to be in disobedience. That's sublimely ridiculous, given the conditionality of the promise. And then God's man steps in. A prophet comes in. He just bursts on the scene in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1, and it said Elijah the Tishbite. We don't know who he was before that, but he walked straight into the king's palace. This is Ahab's palace. And he said, it's not going to rain until I say so. He leaves the palace, he escapes with his life somehow, and that beautiful fertile crescent there, the area where Israel was, where there was a land of milk and honey. It was a land where there was plenty of water, there was plenty of flowers, there was plenty of fruit. They had grapes that took 2 men to carry, if you know anything about the Exodus story. But that land, without rain, became a desert. It became a desert. And then it came time for a showdown. I see this like the OK Corral. If anybody knows about the OK Corral with White Earp and Bat Masterton's lining up against the Cole Younger and the James gang, this is the showdown time. The OK Corral. And in 1 Kings 18, 17 to 18, we find the showdown between these disobedient idolaters, Jezebel and her husband Ahab, and this humble man of God, a praying man of God. And he appeared to Ahab. Ahab was searching for him. He wanted to put him to death. And it came to pass when Ahab saw Elijah that Ahab said unto him, Are you he that troubles Israel? Are you he that troubles Israel? Was he the problem? Well, he said, it's not going to rain till I say so. The Bible tells us, Jesus tells us, and the book of James tells us, that it rained not upon the earth by the space of 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth brought forth her fruit. But he says, Are you he that troubles Israel? Elijah's response, I imagine it was immediate. He didn't have to think about his answer. He said, I've not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house, Omri. In that you have, what have they done? Forsaken the commandments of the Lord and have followed Balaam. Friends, as we look at history from that time forward, and we're going to see some of it in the upcoming presentations, those who have called out for truth, that have stood up for God's word, those that have called others to account because of their disobedience, which is causing major problems in a city, in a country, or in the world, they get blamed for being the troublers. Nothing much has changed. The prophets still get the blame. And then they had the showdown on Mount Carmel, where you've got 850 false prophets. 850 false prophets. 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the grove on one side, and you've got one man standing up for God on the other side. And I want to ask the question, is the majority right? Should we trust the majority view? I remember when I was a new Christian, I went to the Christchurch Town Hall, and there was a man preaching there, and he said a categorical statement, in matters of religion, the majority has never been right. They certainly weren't right this day. And the fire came down from heaven. You can go to that very site today, Mount Carmel. This is a picture of Mount Carmel. And when I travelled through the Middle East, we went from one pile of rocks to the next pile of rocks. And I said to the leader of our tour, he said, "Oh, you're going to get some photos?" And I said, "Piles of rocks are starting to look like piles of rocks to me." They all look the same. I could say these rocks come from anywhere. Everybody's this way photographing the ruins. I'm always the other way photographing the wildlife. And while I was at Mount Carmel, I got a photograph of this beautiful little creature. It's a rock hyrax called a coney in the Bible. But one of the major features of Mount Carmel is this statue of the prophet Elijah standing upon one of the prophets of Baal about to slaughter him. all those prophets got taken down to the brook Kidron and were killed. Let's go back now to that well, Jacob's well in that place, in Shechem. And we'll go to verse 9. Then says the woman of Samaria unto him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Who are the Samaritans? Who are the Samaritans? It is not the 10 tribes that went to the north. They're long since gone. It's not Israel anymore. Samaritans are a different breed of people. And I just want to share with you now who they were. If you go to 2 Kings chapter 17 and verse 16, this is what we read. That they left all the commandments of the God and made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served Baal. That was Israel. And then in verses 27 to 29, we read the king of Assyria commanding, saying, carry thither one of the priests whom you bought from thence, and let them go and dwell there, and let him teach them the manner of the God of the land. He had taken all of the 10 tribes, taken them out of the land, replaced them with people from Babylon, from Kutar, from Ava. These people were put in there. They had no relationship with Abraham, no biological relationship with Israel. These were just people from other countries that had been taken captive by the king of Assyria. They were placed in the land, and lions came in. God sent lions, and that was a wee bit upsetting, having lions coming into your lunchtime. You sit down for lunch and find out that you are lunch. So the lions were coming in. It was a problem to them. And so the king of Assyria said, take one of the priests that we've taken away. What was the priest doing? Was he doing the right thing? They were breaking the commandments of the Lord. They were making statues. They were worshipping idols. They were doing everything that God said not to do. So the priest comes back and he teaches them the manner of the God of the land. I read that and I go, did he know the manner of the God of the land? It's a rhetorical question. No, he had no idea how to worship God. So he goes back to teach these people who had even less idea. Then one of the priests whom they had carried away from Samaria came and dwelt at Bethel and taught them how they should fear the Lord. How do you think that was going to go? These people knew nothing about the Jewish religion. The priest knew maybe a little, but it was so perverted that when he comes, they're never going to learn the way of the God of heaven. They're not going to learn anything about the conditionality of the promises made in Deuteronomy. And we read this, howbeit every man made gods of their own and put them in the houses of the high places which the Samaritans had made. Every nation in the cities wherein they dwelt. Is it any wonder that temple that Sanballat built, any wonder that it was destroyed in 129 by John Hyrcanus? They were doing pagan stuff in a temple supposedly dedicated to God. We continue to read on. So they feared the Lord and made unto themselves of the lowest of them priests of the high places, which sacrificed for them in the houses of the high places. Friends, it's a reality. When a religion is on a downhill spiral, it's when they start making leaders in the church of people whom God has clearly stated shouldn't be leaders. The priesthood were a very special group of people, and there was a lot of conditions around that. And we find in some of the biggest religions in the world, they had some conditions about leadership that have been spurned by the people that came on in the latter days. And is it any wonder that they go into decline? I've seen example after example. They feared the Lord and served their own gods after the manner of the nations whom they carried away. Even unto this day do they after the former manners. And it says they fear not the Lord, neither do they after their statutes or after their ordinances or after the law and the commandment which the Lord commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel. Who are these Samaritans? They're a mishmash of people from all different nations. They've got a perverted view of how to worship God. And this lady says to Jesus, well, why is it that you say Jerusalem, our people say Gerizim? Why is it? Why is it that our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and yet you say Jerusalem is the place to worship? It's a valid question. But she is in complete and total ignorance about the answer. Would you agree with me on that? She's got no way of knowing what is taught in Jerusalem, because the Jews and the Samaritans would have nothing to do with each other. They had a hatred that it took a miracle of God to break down. Jesus says unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour comes when you shall neither in this mountain nor yet at where? Don't forget that, friends, and those watching online. Nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. You worship you know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. Paul would write later on, what advantage then has the Jew, or what profit is there of circumcision? Much every way, chiefly because unto them were committed the oracles of God. The one thing that the Jews had was this book. They had the truth. No other nation had this. No other nation had the understanding of who the true God was. And Paul said, for what if some of them did not believe? Shall their unbelief make the faith of God of no effect? Jesus says to the woman, the hour comes and now is when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in two things. What are those two things? Spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such to worship him. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth, not tradition. It's got to be truth and it's got to be spirit. It's not entertainment, it's truth. And only the Jews had that. And the woman said unto him, I know that Messiah comes, which is called Christ. When he has come, he will tell us all things. This is the first time Jesus says this. He says it to this Samaritan woman who's got no idea about the true God. He says, I that speak unto you am he. Who is he claiming to be? Hashtag Messiah. Deuteronomy 28, verses 1 to 14. Blessings, Mount Gerizim. Blessings, if. Mount Ebal, cursings, if. Verse 15 is so clear. But it shall come to pass, if you will not hearken unto the voice of the Lord your God, to observe, to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you this day, that all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. Is that conditional or unconditional? It's conditional. Blessings and choices. Many of you may have been taught that Israel, the Jews, are going to receive blessings because of God's promise. It is absolutely clear that those blessings are dependent upon my choice and their choice. And we're going to see in the next presentation what choice they made as we look at the rise and fall of Israel.